Hello students and welcome to G3 e-learning classes. Now we are going to do our next part of chapter We Were Not Afraid to Die If We Can All Be Together. So we have already done the first part and now we are going to do its next part. By morning on January 3, the pumps had the water level sufficiently under control for us to take 2 hours rest in rotation, but we still had a tremendous leak somewhere below the water line, and on checking I found that nearly all the boat's main rib frames were smashed down to the keel. In fact, there was nothing holding up a whole section of the starboard hull except a few cupboard partitions. On January 3rd, in morning, the water level was in control and they took 2 hours rest in rotation, but there was still leaking somewhere in the boat. When Arthur checked it, he found that the main rib of the boat was smashed and only few cupboard partitions were holding up them. Next, we had survived for 15 hours since the wave hit, but wave walker wouldn't hold together long enough for us to reach Australia. I checked our charts and calculated that there were 2 small islands a few hundred kilometers to the east. One of them, Amsterdam, was a French scientific base. Our only hope was to reach these pinpricks in the vast ocean, but unless the wind and seas abated so we could hoist sail, our chances would be slim indeed. The great wave had put our auxiliary engine out of action. After 15 hours of survival, he checked charts and calculated and came to know that there were 2 small islands a few hundred kilometers to the coast, and one of them was Amsterdam, which was a French scientific base, and their only hope was to reach there, and it was a difficult task in a vast ocean, as a great wave put their boat engine out of action and winds were high speed and sea waves could hoist sail. On January 4, after 36 hours of continuous pumping, we reached the last few centimeters of water. Now we had only to keep pace with the water still coming in. We could not set any sail on the mainmast. Pressure on the rigging would simply pull the damaged section of the hull apart. So we hoisted the storm bitch and headed for where I thought the 2 islands were. Mary found some corned beef and crackers, biscuits, and we ate our first meal in almost 2 days. Here author is explaining that on January 4th, it was endless struggle of 36 hours on the sea, and it seems very difficult to set sail on the mast. Pressure on the rope pulled the damaged section of the hull apart, and then they headed for the 2 islands where they were thinking of going. Author wife found some corned beef and cracker biscuits, and they ate their first meal in 2 days. But our respite was short-lived. At 4 p.m., black clouds began building up behind us. Within the hour, the wind was back to 40 knots and the seas were getting higher. The weather continued to deteriorate throughout the night, and by dawn on January 5th, our situation was again desperate. Here, after a short rest, it is short-lived here. The short rest. It is about 4 p.m. Black clouds began to come, and within hour, wind was back to 40 knot, and the waves were getting higher. Weather was worst the whole night, and the January 5th early morning, the situation was hopeless. When I went into the comfort sorry when I went to comfort the children, John asked, "Daddy, are we going to die?" I tried to assure him that we could make it, but Daddy, he went on, we aren't afraid of dying if we can all be together, you and Mummy, Sue and I. When Arthur went to console the children, John asked his father whether they were going to die. On this, but again he said his father that they aren't afraid of dying if they can all be together. I could find no words with which to respond, but I left the children's cabin, determined to fight the sea with everything I had to protect the weakened starboard side. I decided to have it to, and with the undamaged port hull facing the oncoming waves, using an improvised sea anchor of heavy nylon rope and two 22-liter plastic barrels of paraffin. See, Arthur was very surprised to see the courage of the little boy, but he said no word, and he left the children's cabin to fight the sea to protect the weakened starboard side. He improvised sea anchor of heavy nylon rope and two 22-liter plastic barrels of paraffin. That evening, Mary and I sat together holding hands as the motion of the ship brought more and more water in through the broken planks. We both felt the end was very near. When both Arthur and his wife felt that their end was near, but they did not lose courage, they sat together holding hands. But Wave Walker rode out the storm, and by the morning of January 6, with the wind easing, I tried to get a reading on the sextant. Back in the chart room, I worked on wind speeds, changes of course, drift and current in an effort to calculate our position. The best I could determine was that we were somewhere in 150,000 kilometers of ocean, looking for a 65-kilometer wide island. By the morning, January 6, as wind was slow, the Wave Walker rode out the storm. Then Arthur tried to get reading through the sextant, means an instrument for measuring angles and distance. Okay, and then he came back to the chart room and worked on wind speeds, drift and current to calculate their position, and they were 150,000 kilometers from 65 kilometers wide island. While I was thinking Sue, moving painfully, joined me. The left side of her head was now very swollen, and her blackened eyes narrowed slits. She gave me a card she had made. On the front, she had drawn caricatures of Mary and me with the words, "Here are some funny people. Did they make you laugh?" I laughed a lot as well. Inside was a message, "Oh, how I love you both." So this card is to say thank you and let's hope for the best. Somehow we had to make it. When author was trying to do his best, tried to do his best, when author was thinking all these, Sue came to him and with swollen head and her eyes were blackened. She handed over a handmade card which she had made herself. On that card, Sue drew caricature of Mary and authors, and she wrote the words, and that words are, "Here are some funny people. Did they make you laugh?" I laughed a lot as well. She also wrote a message inside the card, and that is that she loved them, and it worked as a strength for author in this difficult situation. I checked and rechecked my calculations. We had lost our main compass, and I was using a spare which had not been corrected for magnetic variation. I made an allowance for this and another estimate of the influence of the westerly currents which flow through this part of the Indian Ocean. Author checked and rechecked all his calculations. The compass which he was using was not corrected for magnetic variation, and he made the estimate of the influence of the westerly currents which flow through the Indian Ocean. About 2 p.m. I went on deck and asked Larry to steer a course of 185 degrees. If we were lucky, I told him with a conviction I did not feel he could expect to see the island at about 5 p.m. Here author is saying that about 2 p.m. he went on deck and gave a sign of 185 degree to Larry and said with belief that if they would be lucky, they could reach the island at about 5 p.m. Then with a heavy heart I went below, climbed on my bunk and amazingly dozed off. When I woke, it was 6 p.m. and growing dark. I knew we must have missed the island, and with the sail we had left, we couldn't hope to beat back into the westerly winds. With a heavy heart, he went to his bunk. Bunk means in my earlier video I told this meaning, a sleeping berth in a ship's cabin, okay, and dozed off means feel asleep. He woke up 6 p.m. and he thought that he missed the island and was sure that they cannot go back into the westerly winds because they were very powerful. At that moment, a tousled head appeared by my bunk. "Can I have a hug?" Jonathan asked. Sue was right behind him. At that moment, Jonathan appeared with disordered head. Tousled head means disordered head, and asked for a hug, and Sue was with him. Because you, why am I getting a hug now? I asked. Then author asked why he was getting the hug from his children. Because you are the best daddy in the whole world and the best captain, my son replied. Then Jonathan replied that he was the best father in the world and in the whole world and best captain as well. Not today, John, I'm afraid. As because Arthur was afraid, so he refused to this hug. Why you must be, said Sue in a matter of fact voice. You found the island. Now here on this, Sue said that he found the island. What? I shouted. On this, the author shouted with joy. It's out there in front of us. They just as big as a battleship. I rushed on deck and gazed with relief at the stark outline of Amsterdam. It was only a bleak piece of volcanic rock with little vegetation, the most beautiful island in the world. Then Arthur rushed on rack and gazed the outline of the Amsterdam, and it was a bleak piece of volcanic rock with little vegetation, and it was the most, or you can say it is the most beautiful island in the world. And we anchored offshore for the night, and the next morning all 28 inhabitants of the island cheered as they helped us ashore. And then they anchored offshore. It was the island of 28 inhabitants. With land under my feet again, my thoughts were full of Larry and Herbie, cheerful and optimistic under the direst stress, and of Mary, who stayed at the wheel for all those crucial hours. Most of all, I thought of a 7-year-old girl who did not want us to worry about a head injury, which subsequently took 6 minor operations to remove of recurring blood clot between skin and skull, and of 6-year-old boy who was not afraid to die. At the end, everybody was cheerful and optimistic when they felt island, or you can say land, under their feet. The captain's son said, "We are not afraid to die if we can all be together." The wind eased and the ship came out of the storm slowly. It was a safe landing. All felt very happy about it. Sue took 6 minor operations to remove blood clot between skin and skull. And this is the end of our chapter. So now you all will tell me what moral we can get from this story. I hope you understand the story. Thank you so much.